Marcus Vell pressed the barrel of his rifle against Victoria Hale's temple and smiled. "Tell me the access code," he said, "or I start shooting hostages one by one until you do." 63 people. One building locked down. 5 armed men who had planned every detail of this operation for 8 months. And nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody even looked up from the floor. Except one man in the back of the room, a guy in a faded courier jacket, flat on the ground with his cheek against the cold tile, who was already counting exits, tracking weapons, and running numbers in his head the way other men count sheep before sleep. He wasn't law enforcement, he wasn't security, he was a single father who came to this building to sign a form for his daughter's school savings account. But the moment that rifle touched Victoria Hale's head, something woke up inside Ethan Walker that 6 years of quiet civilian life had never managed to put down for good. Marcus Vell thought he controlled this building. He had no idea he had just made the only mistake that was going to cost him everything. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe and stay with me. You do not want to miss where this one goes. Ethan Walker had a rule about mornings. Keep them boring, keep them quiet, keep them exactly the same, because the same meant safe, and safe was the only thing that mattered when you were the only parent a 9-year-old girl had left in the world. So every morning, without variation, without complaint, he got up at 5:45 before Mia stirred. He made coffee black, 2 cups, nothing fancy. He cut the crusts off her toast because she had been asking him to do that since she was 4 years old, and he had never once forgotten. He checked her backpack, he checked the weather, he drove her to school along the same route, parked in the same spot, and walked her to the same door where Mrs. Callahan, her 3rd-grade teacher, always stood with a smile that told Ethan someone out there appreciated what it took to do this alone. He never told Mrs. Callahan what he used to do for a living. He never told anyone. That morning, the 14th of October, started the same way every other morning started. Mia ate her toast. She told him about a dream she had, where their dog, a fat golden retriever named Biscuit, could suddenly speak, and all Biscuit wanted to talk about was whether the kitchen trash can had anything good in it. Ethan laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep and warm, not the polite kind he gave coworkers when they tried to be funny. "What did he sound like?" Ethan asked, pulling onto the main road. "Like a weatherman," Mia said, completely serious. Very professional, very concerned about the trash. He dropped her at school, kissed the top of her head, and watched her run through the door without looking back, because at 9 years old, you were already halfway to being your own person, and you didn't need your dad to watch you disappear inside. He sat in the car for exactly 30 seconds after the door closed. He always did that. He didn't know why. Maybe he just needed the transition. Maybe he needed the moment between being dad and being whatever it was he had to be for the rest of the day. Today, that meant the Harmon Financial Building on 5th Avenue. He had gotten a letter 3 weeks ago about Mia's education savings account, some kind of administrative flag, paperwork that needed a signature in person, a form that could not be handled online because the system was outdated, and the people who maintained it were apparently allergic to the 21st century. He had called twice, been transferred 4 times, and finally accepted that the only way to resolve it was to walk in, stand in front of a human being, and handle it face to face. He scheduled the appointment for 10 in the morning. He planned to be done by 10:30, grab lunch, and pick Mia up from school himself, since it was a half day. Simple, boring, safe. The lobby of the Harmon Financial Building was the kind of place that made you feel slightly underdressed the moment you walked in. All clean lines and polished floors, the smell of money and filtered air. Ethan wore his work jacket, the dark blue one, with the courier company logo stitched on the chest, because he had come straight from a morning run and hadn't thought to change. He didn't care. He had walked into worse places wearing worse things. He signed in at the front desk, got a visitor badge, and was told to wait in the main lobby seating area until his appointment contact came down. He found a chair near the back wall. Habit, not a strategy, or at least that's what he told himself, and settled in. The lobby was busy. A Tuesday morning in downtown Seattle meant foot traffic, meetings, deliveries. There were maybe 30 or 40 people visible from where he sat. business types mostly. A few assistants, a couple of security guards at a desk near the main doors, a man in a hard hat on a phone call who looked like he was arguing with a contractor, and one woman who entered from the elevator bank at 9:58 and immediately commanded the entire place without doing anything dramatic. She was maybe mid-30s, sharp, purposeful. She moved through a lobby full of people the way a ship cuts water, not aggressive, just absolutely certain of where she was going. She had that specific quality that some people just carry, the sense that the air around them had already agreed to get out of the way. Her assistant, a young woman with a tablet, was almost jogging to keep pace. Ethan caught the name on a lanyard around the CEO's neck from 15 feet away. Victoria Hale. He didn't know who she was at the time. He would learn later, but he noticed her the way he noticed everything cataloged, filed, moved on. He checked his phone. 9:59. He thought about what Mia wanted for lunch. And then the front doors of the building opened with a sound that was wrong. Not wrong like a loud noise is wrong, wrong like a frequency. You can't quite hear, but your body registers before your brain does. The doors opened, and the quality of the air changed, the temperature, the pressure, something mechanical and animal, in the back of Ethan's spine that had been asleep for 6 years, snapped upright like a circuit closing. 5 men came through the front doors. They moved in a pattern. 2 to the left toward the security desk, 1 straight down the center. 2 more flanking wide to cut off the side exits. Ethan had already identified all 3 exits before the first shout hit the ceiling. Nobody moves, hands where I can see them. Every single person, hands up. Do not reach. Do not run. Do not make me tell you again. The voice belonged to the man who had come through the center. He was the one in charge, Ethan could tell, from the way the others moved in relation to him. How they deferred to his positioning without being told. Mid-40s, military posture, civilian clothes. Someone who had been in organized environments before. He held an AR-style rifle with the ease of someone who was not performing. He had used one before. The lobby dissolved into screaming for about 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a long time when you know what to do with it. Ethan was already on the floor, not because he was told to, but because lowering his profile while the room was still processing chaos was the correct instinct. He went down, and he went still, and he watched from the floor while people around him scrambled and cried and made all the noise that panic demands. He counted 5 men, 4 visible weapons, 2 rifles, 1 shotgun, 1 sidearm on the man who had gone left. The 5th man, the one who had taken the far right exit, hadn't shown a weapon yet, which meant either concealed or he was carrying something that required both hands. The security guards at the desk never had a chance. One of the armed men was already behind the desk before the guards fully registered what was happening, and he collected their weapons with a practiced efficiency that told Ethan these 5 had done something like this before, or they had prepared for an extremely long time. The man in the center, Ethan mentally named him. Lead moved through the room without hurrying, calling out commands in a voice that was loud enough to carry without quite tipping into panic. He was managing the room. That was deliberate. Phones on the floor. Right now. Slide them away from you. Anyone I see holding a phone in 30 seconds is going to have a very bad day. I'm not negotiating that point. People complied. The phones hit the floor in a cascade of plastic and glass. Lyd came to a stop in the center of the lobby and turned slowly, scanning. His eyes moved past Ethan, just past him, because Ethan was already on the floor, already still, already part of the furniture, in the way that men who have spent time in hostile environments learn to become not invisible, just uninteresting. Lyd's eyes found Victoria Hale. She had not run. She had not screamed. She was standing near the elevator bank with her hands partially raised. Her face carefully composed, the way a person's face looks when they are absorbing something catastrophic and refusing to externalize it. Her assistant was beside her, crying quietly. Lyd walked directly toward her. "Victoria Hale," he said. "Not a question." She said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, "Yes, good. We're going to take a walk. You're going to cooperate. Nothing bad has to happen here if people make smart decisions." He gestured toward the hallway that led to the conference rooms. "This way, you know who I am," she said. "I know exactly who you are. Then you know that whatever you're planning is already happening," he said. "Walk." Two of his men separated her from the group and moved her toward the hallway. Her assistant reached out and grabbed her arm, and one of the men stepped between them, not violently, just firmly, and the assistant was redirected to the main group of hostages being corralled into the center of the lobby. The hostages there were 41 of them. Ethan counted were arranged in a rough cluster in the lobby's open center. Two of Leeds' men covered them from opposite angles. Good positioning, clean sight lines. Someone had thought this through. Ethan stayed low near the back wall. The man who had not shown a weapon, Ethan now called him Ghost in his head, for lack of anything better, was moving along the perimeter of the room. He was checking each of the exits, physically testing them, confirming they were sealed. He had some kind of device on his belt that he used on the main entrance, electronic, not mechanical, and after 30 seconds, the locks on the front doors cycled with a sound Ethan felt in his back teeth. They had come prepared for a building with electronic security, which meant they had inside knowledge, which meant someone had given them the layout and the access codes, which meant this was not a spontaneous robbery or a desperate act. This was a professional operation with a specific objective. And that objective was Victoria Hale. Ethan did not move. He lay there on the polished floor of a financial building in downtown Seattle, a courier company logo on his chest, and a peanut butter sandwich still in his jacket pocket from habit. And he ran through what he knew. 5 men, professional operation, high-value target isolated. Electronic countermeasures deployed. Police had not yet responded. Shots fired into the ceiling had been suppressed, he realized, which is why it hadn't triggered the external alarm that the noise alone would have caused. These men had thought about noise suppression, entry protocols, target isolation, and electronic lockdown. They had not thought about him. Because there was no reason to think about him. He was nobody, a courier in an old jacket. A man who drove a 9 Honda Accord and packed his daughter's lunch and fixed the leaky pipe under the kitchen sink on Saturday mornings, because a plumber was $60 an hour, and $60 an hour was Mia's school supplies for 2 months. He's a nobody, which meant he was the only person in that room who had any chance of doing something. Hey, the whisper came from his left. He turned his head slightly. A man maybe 60 years old, gray hair, reading glasses still on his face, was lying about 3 feet away. He had a name tag that said Gerald and a look in his eyes that was somewhere between terrified and stubbornly determined to hold himself together. "You were in the military," Gerald whispered. It wasn't a question. Ethan looked at him. "I was too," Gerald said. "Army. Long time ago. The way you went down when they came in, that wasn't a civilian reaction." Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then, very quietly, "How many people in this building who are not in this room?" Gerald blinked. He hadn't expected that question. He thought about it. Building management. Maybe 2 or 3 in the basement level. Office workers on floors 3 through 6. Maybe 40-50 people who haven't come down yet. A maintenance crew on 4. Emergency exits, stairwell A at the back. Stairwell B on the north side. Loading dock access in the basement has an exterior door that opens manually. Management uses it for deliveries. Ethan absorbed this. "Do you know where they keep the building schematics?" "In a management office, usually." "Second floor," Gerald said, "off the east corridor." "Okay." Ethan looked at him. "Do you have any medical conditions I need to know about?" Gerald blinked again. "My knee's been bad since '89. "Why are you asking me that?" "Because when I move, I need to know who can move with me and who needs to stay put." He held Gerald's eyes. "Stay put for now. Don't look at me. Don't signal anything. Just be a scared old man who isn't making trouble." "I'm not that old," Gerald said. "Gerald, right. Scared old man. Got it." Ethan turned his eyes back to the room. One of the guards, he named them by position now, north and south, was walking a slow circuit around the hostage group. South, the one with the shotgun, was closer to Ethan's position than north, but south was also more agitated. He moved with energy to burn, which meant he was nervous, which meant he was the variable. North was calmer, slower, which made him more dangerous in a sustained situation, but more predictable in the immediate. Ghost was still on the perimeter. Led and the 2 men who had taken Victoria were somewhere in the hallway beyond the lobby. Ethan needed to know what was happening in that hallway. He also needed to know where his daughter was. The thought arrived like a cold hand on his shoulder, and he felt it travel down his spine. Mia's school let out at noon today. It was a half day. She was expecting him to pick her up himself, he had told her this morning, made a specific point of it, because she liked when he came instead of the carpool. She would wait. She would be fine. She was at school, which was safe, which was a building full of adults who were responsible for her, and she would not know anything was wrong until he didn't show up. He pushed it down. He pushed it all the way down into the part of himself where he kept everything that could not be useful right now, because useful was the only currency that mattered in the next hour, and fear was not useful, grief was not useful. And the thought of his 9-year-old daughter waiting by the school door, looking for a gray Honda Accord that wasn't coming, was absolutely, completely, entirely not useful. So it went down into the locked room, and Ethan breathed. He had a 3-count breath protocol that his team leader, a man named Santos, had taught him during the worst weeks of a deployment he still couldn't fully name. In for 3, hold for 3, out for 3, not a meditation thing. A calibration thing, a way of telling your nervous system, we are not dying yet, we have a task, let's think. He breathed, he thought. The hallway where they had taken Victoria was roughly 40 feet from his current position, running east, along the building's main structural wall. He knew this from the building layout he had glanced at, purely from habit, when he came in and signed at the front desk. The conference rooms were at the end of that hallway. 3 of them, and a smaller alcove used for video conferencing. The last one, Conference Room C, was the largest and the most private, which meant it was almost certainly where Lead had taken her. He needed to get to that hallway. To do that, he needed South to be somewhere other than where South was. He spent 45 seconds watching South's circuit. The man moved in a rough oval back wall, left side, front of the hostage group, right side, back wall again. The circuit took roughly 90 seconds. The blind spot, the moment when South's back was to the rear of the room, lasted approximately 8 seconds. 8 seconds. He had worked with less. The problem was Ghost, who was still moving along the perimeter. Ghost's path was less predictable, which made him the variable that could blow the entire thing open. Ethan needed to track Ghost's position independently from South's circuit, which meant he needed to watch 2 things simultaneously and make a decision about a window that might be 4 seconds or might not exist at all. He settled in to watch. This was the part that most people didn't understand about what he used to do. They thought it was about physical capability, about fighting, about weapons and technique. And those things mattered. They absolutely mattered. But the foundation of everything, the thing that made it possible to function when the world was falling apart around you, was patience. The patience to watch, the patience to wait, the patience to not move until moving was the right thing to do. He had learned that patience from a lot of hours in a lot of dark places, and he had learned it at considerable cost. And he had spent 6 years trying to leave it behind him, because patience in service of violence is a heavy thing to carry around a grocery store, around a school pickup line, around the kitchen where your daughter is telling you about a dream her dog had. But it was still there. It had always been still there. It just waited. South completed 2 more circuits. Ghost crossed the back of the room twice and settled near the fire door on the north side, which he seemed to be monitoring. This gave Ethan a fixed reference point for Ghost not moving continuously, but stationary and alert. Which was worse. A stationary, alert adversary is harder to evade than a moving, distracted one. He recalculated. The answer was that he couldn't use the rear path. Not without Ghost seeing him. Which meant the only other option was the floor-level service access panel he had noticed near the base of the east wall. When he came in a maintenance panel, roughly 2 feet by 3 feet, that would require him to cross approximately 12 feet of open floor, panel himself through a gap designed for HVAC technicians, and emerge somewhere in the building's service corridor. He had noticed it the way he noticed everything. He had never thought he would need it. He spent 30 seconds evaluating whether a 6'1" man who had gained maybe 15 pounds in 6 years of peaceful civilian life could fit through that panel. He decided the answer was yes if he exhaled first. South's circuit, Ghost's position, his own heartbeat. 3 variables, 1 window, 1 move, he waited. And then Gerald, 3 feet to his left, did something that Ethan would later tell him, quietly and without any real anger, was one of the most terrifying things he had ever witnessed in the field. Gerald coughed. Not a small cough. A loud, genuine, body-rattling cough that came from somewhere in the man's chest and had clearly been suppressed for the last several minutes. South snapped toward the sound. Ghost straightened and looked. Leeds' voice came from the hallway. What was that? One of the hostages North called back, old man coughing. A pause. Keep them quiet. South moved toward the hostage group, specifically toward Gerald, which took him off his circuit and put him 6 feet from Ethan's path to the panel. Which also meant he was facing Gerald, which meant his back was to the wall, which meant the panel was in his blind spot. Ethan looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at Ethan with the expression of a man who had no idea he had just done something useful, and was primarily hoping to not get shot. Ethan gave him the smallest nod in the history of human communication. He moved. He went flat across the floor in the way that looks impossible, until you understand that the body has a relationship with gravity that most people never fully exploit. He covered 12 feet in under 4 seconds, staying below the height of the seats that blocked the direct sightline from the hostage group. He reached the panel. He found the catch with his fingers without looking at it. HV panels have been using the same basic catch mechanism since approximately 1975, and he had cleared buildings with worse access than this. The panel opened inward. He pulled himself through. He emerged into darkness. Behind him, he heard South's voice addressing Gerald about the coughing. He heard Gerald say in a voice that was actually impressively steady for a 60-year-old man with a bad knee, "Sorry. Allergies. Can't help it." Ethan pulled the panel closed behind him. He sat in the service corridor, narrow, low-ceilinged, smelling of dust and old electrical, and he breathed. He was in. He did not know yet exactly what he was going to do. He knew the objective: Victoria Hale, the conference room at the end of the east hallway, lead and 2 armed men. He knew the secondary objective: 41 people in the lobby who needed to get out. He knew the tertiary objective: a building full of people on the upper floors, who didn't know what was happening and needed to stay out of it until they could be moved safely. He didn't have a weapon. He had training, patience, and the full contents of his jacket pockets, which were his car keys, his phone locked out and silenced, a granola bar, and a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in a paper towel. He had also, in his 6 years of civilian life, learned that the most dangerous thing about being a man with his training was the tendency to think that violence was the only language worth speaking. Santos had told him that too at the end. In the weeks after the mission that ended everything, when Ethan was sitting in a clinical room in Bethesda filling out forms, and Santos was sitting across from him with a face full of things neither of them knew how to say. The hardest part, Santos had told him, is not the training. It's knowing when not to use it. It's knowing when the answer is patience, not force. Because the training is always going to be there screaming at you to do something, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is wait. Ethan sat in the service corridor. He waited. He thought about Victoria Hale in that conference room and what she was being asked to give up and whether she was going to hold. He thought about 41 people sitting on a polished floor with their phones taken away, waiting for something to happen that they could do nothing about. He thought about Gerald and his 60-year-old bad knee and his army straight spine and the steadiness in his voice when he lied to an armed man about allergies. And then he stopped thinking about all of it, because thinking was not the next thing. The next thing was moving through this service corridor, finding the junction that should connect to the east hallway's maintenance access, and getting eyes on conference room C. Everything else would come after. He started moving. The service corridor ran roughly parallel to the main hallway, separated by 14 inches of structural wall. He knew this from nothing except the building layout he had absorbed in about 3 seconds when he walked in, which was also the moment he had noticed the maintenance panel and the emergency exit signage and the positions of the security cameras, and the way the security guards sat in a way that suggested they had not actually been expecting trouble. That 3-second red of a room, that was what nobody understood about what his life had been. It wasn't the training, not really. The training gave you tools. But the thing itself, the thing that a decade of operational experience builds in you, is a way of seeing the world that never fully switches off. You walk into a coffee shop and you know which table has the best sight lines. You walk into a grocery store and you notice the exits before you notice the prices. You walk into your daughter's school for a parent-teacher conference, and you find yourself cataloging the building's access points, and it makes you feel like a monster, slightly, like something is broken in you. And you go home, and you make dinner, and you remind yourself that being able to see all of that is not the same thing as having to act on it. Until it is, the junction was exactly where he expected it to be. The corridor branched left toward the utility rooms, and right toward what should be the access point for the east hallway. He went right. The access hatch was another panel, this one latched with a turnpin mechanism. He undid it. He looked through the gap, the hallway. And 15 feet away, through the glass panel of Conference Room C's door, he could see Victoria Hale sitting at the head of a conference table, her hands flat on the table surface, her face composed and absolutely still. And Lead, standing across from her, talking, and even through the wall, even through the muffled distance, Ethan could hear enough of what was being said to understand. Two things. Victoria Hale was refusing, and she had been refusing for long enough that Lead was about to stop being patient. He evaluated the door, the room, the position of the two men flanking Lead, the one exit from the conference room, and the distance from the hatch to the door. He had maybe 4 minutes before the situation inside that room changed in a way that couldn't be reversed. 4 minutes. He had what was in his pockets and what was in his head, and what 6 years of living quietly had not managed to take from him. He started to think. Ethan moved through the service corridor the way water moves through a crack in stone, not forcing, not rushing, finding the path that already existed and following it without wasting a single motion. He had 4 minutes. Maybe less. He knew what maybe less meant in a room where a man like Marcus Vell was holding a rifle and running out of patience. The corridor branched again 20 feet ahead, and he took the right fork without hesitating, keeping his shoulders angled to fit the narrow space, his breathing controlled and even. The smell of old dust and electrical insulation was familiar in a way that had nothing to do with this building. It had to do with other buildings, in other countries, under circumstances that he had spent 6 years trying to classify as a different life. They weren't a different life. He understood that now with a clarity that arrived not as a revelation, but as a simple practical fact, the way you understand that water is wet not because someone told you, but because you are standing in it. He reached the junction point he was looking for and stopped. Through the thin wall to his right, he could hear voices. Marcus Vell's voice was the kind of voice that had learned to stay controlled, specifically, because the man behind it knew how frightening controlled sounded when everything else was chaos. Low, even deliberate. "I'm going to give you 60 seconds, Ms. Hale. That's more than fair. That's actually generous, given the circumstances. The access code to the Sentinel architecture. 60 seconds. Victoria's response came without a pause, which told Ethan something important about her. "You can count to 60 as many times as you want," she said. The answer is going to be the same. A silence. Then Vell, quieter. "You understand what I'm telling you I'll do." "I understand exactly what you're telling me. I'm telling you that what you're asking for would compromise security infrastructure protecting 11 federal installations and over 200 private institutions. So no, not for my life, not for anyone in that lobby." "I'm sorry. The answer is no." Ethan heard one of Vell's men shift position, the sound of a boot on the hard floor, a small movement but enough to track. 2 men in the room with Vell and Victoria, one near the door, one near the far wall. He had confirmed that, through the glass panel before pulling back into the corridor. He needed one of them out of the room. He looked at what he had. His car keys, his phone, a granola bar, a peanut butter sandwich, and a paper towel. And the service corridor itself, which ran along the east wall and connected. He traced the logic of the building's bones in his head to the utility closet that should share a wall with the conference room's northwest corner. He moved toward the utility closet access. The latch was a simple turn mechanism, and it opened into a space barely large enough to stand in, full of cleaning supplies, and a wheeled mop bucket, and a circuit panel on the back wall. He looked at the circuit panel. He looked at the conference room wall, 6 inches to his right. He thought about what cutting power to conference room C's section of the building would do to the 2 men flanking Vel. Trained men don't panic when lights go out, but they do move. And moving creates a window, even if the window is 2 seconds wide. He needed more than 2 seconds. He needed a reason for one of them to open that door. He took out his phone, screen brightness all the way down. He pulled up the flashlight function, not to use it, but to have it ready. And then he looked at the granola bar in his hand, and had an idea that Santos would have called either brilliant or insane depending on whether it worked. He unwrapped the granola bar. He needed noise, specific noise. The kind that sounds like a person, not a mechanical malfunction. Because a mechanical malfunction makes trained men hold position, while a person moving in an adjacent space makes at least one of them investigate. He pressed the granola bar wrapper flat against the wall of the utility closet and began working it slowly, methodically, creating the irregular soft crinkle of someone moving carefully in a space that was not quite large enough. He did this for 15 seconds. He stopped. He listened. Silence from the conference room. Then Vel's voice quieter. Check the utility closet. Ethan moved to the far side of the circuit panel and made himself small. The door opened. The man who came through was not Ghost. This was one of the 2 flanking men, shorter than Ghost, moving with the brisk efficiencies of someone who expected to find nothing and wanted to confirm it quickly so he could get back to his position. He stepped into the utility closet. He looked left. He started to look right. Ethan was already moving. The technique was not violent in the way that movies make violence look. It was abrupt and precise and had nothing dramatic about it whatsoever, a specific application of leverage to a specific point, and the man's consciousness simply went away, the way a switch goes off. He was unconscious before he fully understood that something had happened. And Ethan lowered him to the floor of the utility closet, with the care of someone who was not interested in permanent damage to a person whose full story he did not know. He checked the man for weapons, a sidearm, a radio on his belt, volume low, carrying static and occasional clipped exchanges between Vel's team. Ethan took the radio. He took the sidearm. He set the sidearm on the floor behind the mop bucket because carrying it into that conference room was the kind of decision that ended conversations permanently. And he was not ready to make that decision yet. He wanted options that didn't require him to make permanent decisions. He took the radio and clipped it to his jacket. He listened to the conference room. One man left flanking Vel himself Victoria. And 60 seconds had almost certainly passed. He heard Vel say Kowalski. Talk to me, static from the radio on Ethan's hip. A pause. Kowalski, harder this time. Ethan keyed the radio once, a brief burst of static, the kind that might mean a response was coming, the kind that bought approximately 10 seconds before the absence of an actual voice became suspicious. He stepped out of the utility closet, moved to the conference room door, and knocked. 3 knocks, firm, the knock of a man who had a reason to be there. He heard the remaining flanking man say, "It's Kowalski." And because this was not the movies, and trained men don't just open doors without checking, the man called back. "Clear to enter?" Ethan said nothing, which was either a mistake or the exact right thing, because the absence of a response from a man who should have responded read as wrong, and the flanking man opened the door to see why Kowalski wasn't talking. He opened the door. He found Ethan. The second exchange was faster than the first, because Ethan had less space and less time, and the man had already registered that something was wrong, which meant his hands were moving, which meant the window was approximately 1.5 seconds. He used 1 2/3. The man went down in the doorway, and Ethan caught him and moved him sideways out of the frame and looked up. Marcus Vel stood at the far end of the conference table. Victoria Hale sat at the near end. Between them, 12 feet of polished table and a shift in the entire geometry of the situation. Vel looked at Ethan. He took in the courier jacket. He took in the absence of either of his men. He processed this in the span of about 2 seconds, and Ethan watched the processing happen, the moment of genuine confusion, the recalibration, the shift from irritation into something colder and more serious. "Who are you?" Vel said. "Nobody," Ethan said. "I'm a delivery driver." I came in to handle a banking issue. You took down 2 of my men. Your men were between me and the exit. Vel's rifle was pointed at Victoria. He held it there because she was still his leverage, and he knew it, and Ethan knew it, and all 3 of them were aware that the geometry of this room had just changed, but the fundamental equation had not. Victoria turned her head and looked at Ethan. Her eyes were steady. She was reading him the way someone reads a situation they have not encountered before, and are trying to understand quickly. You need to leave, she said. Get out of the building. Go, I can't, Ethan said. There are people in this building who need help more than I do. Go help them. I need to help you first. I've told him no, and I'll keep telling him no. I don't need rescuing. I need you to get those people out. Vel's voice cut between them like a blade. This is a touching conversation. It really is, but here's the reality of what's happening. He shifted the rifle slightly. You are one man with no weapon that I can see, and my radio is now telling me that something has gone wrong in my lobby. So you've been busy. I respect that. But you're also standing in a room with me, which means you've made a mistake, because I don't need both of them. He looked at Victoria. I only need her. Ethan didn't move, he was calculating. Not performing calm, actually calculating, because performance is a luxury, and he didn't have luxuries right now. Vel had a rifle, good shooter's stance, weight balanced, finger discipline. He would not be rattled by Ethan taking a step toward him, because he had shot people before, and he knew the geometry of a rifle at 12 feet. What Vel did not know was that Ethan had been counting his radio traffic for the last 4 minutes. 3 men still in the lobby, Ghost on the perimeter. North and south covering the hostages. Vel's original team was 5, 2 were down, which meant Ghost and North and South were what remained between 41 people and the emergency exits. 3 men, 41 people, who had been sitting on a polished floor for 22 minutes, which was long enough for some of them to stop being purely terrified and start being quietly, carefully angry. Ethan needed Vel in this room for another 6 minutes, which meant he needed to give Vel something to do that wasn't shooting Victoria Hale. The access code she's protecting, Ethan said. I know what it covers. Vel looked at him. 11 federal installations, Ethan said. 2+ private institutions, Sentinel architecture. A pause. Who are you? Vel said again, and this time the question had a different weight. Someone who understands what you're actually selling this to, and who you're selling it to, and what they're going to do with it. Victoria's head turned. She was looking at Ethan with an expression he couldn't fully read, somewhere between suspicion and calculation. Vel said, You have 30 seconds to explain why I should care what you know. Because whoever hired you told you this was an information job. In and out. She gives you the code, you deliver it, you get paid. But the people who hired you, they don't need the Sentinel architecture for defense. They need it to find the gaps, to identify exactly where each of those 11 installations is most exposed. And once they have it, they don't need you anymore. They never did. He paused. You're not walking out of this building either way. But she's the only one in this room who has any interest in making sure that code never gets used the way your clients intend to use it, which makes her the most valuable person here to you. As a witness, as a source, not as a target. The room was very quiet. Vel was still pointing the rifle at Victoria, but he had not spoken for 6 seconds, which was 6 seconds of exactly the kind of time Ethan needed. He watched Vel's face and he saw the thing he was looking for, not belief, not yet, but doubt. The small fracture that opens when a man who has been certain of something is given a reason to wonder. Victoria spoke first. He's right about the architecture, she said quietly. The gaps he's describing, that's what someone would use it for. Not to build, to exploit. She looked at Vel. You know who hired you. You know what they do. Is this the job you thought you were taking? Vel said nothing. The radio on Ethan's hip crackled. A voice, Ghost, in the lobby said, Lead. We've got a situation. One of the hostages is Lead. You need to respond. Vel's attention snapped to the radio. Ethan moved. Not toward Vel, toward the far wall, specifically toward the emergency pull station that he had seen on the wall when he first looked through the glass panel 20 minutes ago. The red manual alarm handle that every building this size was required to have in every conference room by Seattle Fire Code. and which none of Vel's men had thought to disable, because they had disabled the electronic security and assumed that covered it. He pulled it. The alarm was not subtle. It was the specific sound of chaos legitimized the piercing, building-wide wail that every human being has been conditioned since childhood to treat as a reason to move immediately and without debate. In the lobby, Ghost and North and South heard it, and in the lobby, 41 people who had been sitting quietly for 22 minutes heard it too. And some of those people, Gerald among them, Ethan would learn later, decided that an alarm was permission. Vel spun toward Ethan. The rifle came up. Victoria Hale picked up the conference room chair beside her and threw it at Marcus Vel. She threw it hard. She threw it the way someone throws something when they have been sitting across a table from a man with a gun for 22 minutes, and the moment they have been waiting for has finally, irrevocably arrived. It caught Vel in the shoulder and disrupted his aim by approximately 4 feet, which was 4 feet in the right direction. Ethan was already crossing the table. What happened in the next 11 seconds was not something he would ever describe in detail to anyone, including himself, because the mind has a way of compressing certain moments into before and after with only a blur between, and this was one of those moments. He knew only the outcome: Vel on the floor, rifle removed from the equation, Ethan's knee on the man's back, Victoria Hale standing 2 feet away, breathing hard, and holding the chair like she hadn't fully decided whether to put it down. "Are you hurt?" Ethan asked her. "No." She looked at the chair. She set it down. "You pulled the fire alarm. I needed the lobby to move." She looked at him for a moment. "You planned that." "I planned the part where I needed time. The rest I made up." The radio on his hip crackled again. Ghost's voice. Urgent now. Reporting that the hostages were moving, that the alarms were making the situation in the lobby unstable, that he needed lead to respond immediately. Vel was still conscious. He turned his head to look up at Ethan from the floor. "You said you were nobody," he said. "I am nobody," Ethan said. "I'm a father who had paperwork to do." He bound Vel's hands with the man's own belt, an imperfect solution that would hold for the time he needed, and looked at Victoria. "The lobby," he said. "I need to get back there. I'm coming with you." "No, those are my employees out there." Her voice carried the specific tone of someone informing you of a decision that has already been made. "I'm coming." He looked at her for 2 seconds. "Stay behind me," he said. "Don't improvise. You just improvised a fire alarm and a conference table." "Stay behind me," he said again, and moved. The hallway outside the conference room was empty. The 2 flanking men were still down, and the sound of the alarm filled the entire building now with its flat, relentless insistence. They moved fast, Ethan in front, Victoria a step behind, and he was already tracking what he knew: Ghost north, south in the lobby, 41 people in motion because of an alarm that gave them cover they hadn't had before. He turned the corner into the lobby. The scene had shifted. North was against the far wall, his rifle up, yelling at the hostages to sit down, but the hostages were not sitting down anymore. The alarm had given them permission, and they were using it, not rushing the door, not doing anything heroic or stupid, but moving, drifting, creating the kind of loose, collective motion that makes it impossible for 2 men to cover 41 individuals. South was near the security desk, his back partly to the room, talking into his own radio. Ghost was near the front entrance with his hand on something at his belt, the electronic device. Ethan realized, the locking mechanism for the front doors. He was going to seal them again. If Ghost locked those doors, the alarm meant nothing. Ethan had maybe 8 seconds. He looked at the hostage group. He found Gerald. Gerald was looking at him from across the lobby with the expression of a 60-year-old Army veteran who had spent 22 minutes sitting on a floor being patient and was extremely ready to stop being patient. Ethan made eye contact. He held up one finger and pointed at Ghost. Gerald looked at Ghost. He looked back at Ethan. He gave the smallest nod in the history of human communication. Then Gerald stood up, looked directly at Ghost, and said in a voice that carried over the alarm with the specific authority of a man who has spent his life making himself heard in loud environments, "Son, you need to put that down and think very carefully about the next 10 seconds of your life." Ghost turned. Every head in the lobby turned. And in the moment that Ghost's attention moved to the 60-year-old man, standing in the middle of the room with his bad knee and his reading glasses, and his voice full of absolute conviction. Ethan crossed the lobby in 6 steps. The electronic device hit the floor. Ghost went down. North spun toward the sound and found 41 people between him and anything he could do about it. And in the specific arithmetic of that moment, one armed man, 41 people who had just watched 2 things happen that told them the situation had changed. North made the only calculation that made sense. He lowered the rifle, he put it on the floor, he put his hands up. The front doors unlocked, people moved. They moved the way people move when pressure releases not a panic, not a stampede, but a flowing outward, a collective exhale made physical. And within 90 seconds the lobby was clearing, and the sound of sirens was building outside, and the 14th of October was becoming the kind of day that would be described in depositions and news segments, and quiet conversations for a long time. Ethan stood in the middle of the emptying lobby. Victoria appeared beside him. She looked at Gerald, who was helping an older woman toward the door, his bad knee slowing him but not stopping him. She looked at North, sitting on the floor with his hands raised, waiting. She looked at Ethan. "Who are you?" she said. Not the way Vel had asked it, not as a threat assessment, not as a tactical question. As a genuine human, slightly undone question from a woman who had spent 22 minutes refusing to give something up and had just watched a man in a courier jacket dismantle a professional operation using a granola bar. Wrapper, a fire alarm, and an old soldier's cough. Ethan looked at the front door, through which daylight and sirens and the sound of the world restoring itself to something like normal were coming in. He said, "I'm Mia's dad. I need to call the school." He pulled out his phone. Victoria watched him dial. He held the phone to his ear and listened to it ring, and when the school secretary answered, he said, in a voice that carried none of what the last 22 minutes had contained, in a voice that was warm and ordinary, and specifically calibrated for a 9-year-old girl who should not know yet that anything had been wrong. "Hi, this is Ethan Walker, Mia's dad. I'm going to be a little late picking her up today. Can you let her know? Tell her I'll be there." "Tell her I said yeah." "Tell her I said Biscuit says hi." He hung up. Victoria Hale looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the first police vehicles were pulling up. Officers were already moving toward the building, radios crackling, hands on holsters, arriving into a situation that had already resolved itself in ways they would spend the next several hours trying to understand. Gerald came back through the door. He had gotten everyone out, and then apparently turned around, because Gerald was the kind of man who turned around. "You're going to have to talk to a lot of people," Gerald told Ethan. "I know. They're going to want to know everything." "I know. You going to tell them?" Ethan looked at the door where the officers were entering, at Victoria beside him. At the lobby where 41 people had been sitting on a floor 20 minutes ago and were now standing in Seattle morning air, doing the specific kind of breathing that follows surviving something. "I'll tell them what they need to know," he said. Gerald nodded slowly. "Army," he said. "Retired Gerald Marsh. I know a handful of guys with that particular way of moving through a building." Ethan looked at him. "Navy," he said. "Retired." Gerald extended his hand. Ethan shook it. The first officer came through the door with his weapon drawn and his voice raised, calling for everyone to stay calm and identify themselves. And Ethan turned to face him with his hands visible and his jacket open, and his expression carrying the particular quality of a man who has done something significant and is already thinking about how to get to a school pickup in a city where every police radio is going to be tied up for the next 4 hours. Victoria spoke before Ethan could. "Officer," she said, stepping forward. "My name is Victoria Hale. I'm the CEO of Sentinel Technologies. This man saved my life and the lives of everyone in this building. His name is Ethan Walker, and I would appreciate it if you treated him accordingly." The officer looked at Ethan. Ethan said nothing. The officer looked back at Victoria. "Ma'am, I'm going to need everyone to step outside and—" "His daughter is waiting at school," Victoria said. "How long do you actually need him right now?" A pause. The officer, young, maybe 28, still in the part of his career where he was learning that the situations he trained for and the situations he encountered were not always the same shape, looked at his radio. At the lobby, at Ethan. "We're going to need a full statement," he said. But are you injured, sir? No, Ethan said. Then we can get initial statements outside. Detailed debrief can happen in the next hour or two. He was already recalibrating, already reading the room in the way that good officers learn to read rooms. And what this room was telling him was that the crisis was over, and the man in front of him was not a threat. Do you need medical attention? No, Ethan said. I need to know that there are people on floors 3 through 6 who haven't been evacuated yet. Maintenance crew on 4, building management in the basement. They need to know it's clear, the officer spoke into his radio. Ethan watched him relay the information. Gerald was at his shoulder. I told you, Gerald said quietly. Scared old man. Very convincing. You were great, Ethan said. The cough was real, just so you know. I wasn't performing. I've had this thing for 2 weeks. I know. It worked out. It did. Gerald made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been another cough. Navy, he said again, shaking his head. Always with the dramatic exits through maintenance panels. Outside, the October morning was cold and blue and full of people, and Ethan Walker walked through the doors of the Harmon Financial Building with a borrowed radio on his hip and a peanut butter sandwich still in his pocket. And he stood on the sidewalk in downtown Seattle and breathed the outside air and thought about a 9-year-old girl who was going to hear a very boring version of this story for approximately the next 10 years. He thought about that, and it felt like something he could live with. Actually, it felt like everything. They put Ethan in the back of a police SUV at 10:53 in the morning. Not under arrest. Nobody said that word. But the door closed behind him, and the officer who had been assigned to him, a detective named Paulson, 40s. The kind of face that had heard every version of every story, and was genuinely trying to figure out which version of this one was true, sat across from him, with a recorder on the seat between them, and a look that said he was going to need more than. The abbreviated version Ethan had offered on the sidewalk. Walk me through it again, Paulson said, from the beginning. And this time don't leave out the parts you left out the first time. Ethan looked at him. What parts do you think I left out? The parts that explain how one man with no weapon took down 4 armed professionals in under 30 minutes. Paulson leaned back. I've been doing this for 19 years. I know what that requires. I also know what kind of training produces that. So let's skip the part where you tell me you got lucky, and let's talk about who you actually are. Outside the window, the street was controlled chaos ambulances, patrol cars, the building evacuation still in progress. Reporters already gathering at the perimeter. Because someone had called someone, and the word hostage had a way of traveling fast. Ethan watched an EMT walk Gerald to a vehicle and felt something unclench in his chest. Ethan James Walker, he said, Social Security number on file. Former Navy SEAL, SEAL Team 6, separated 6 years ago under honorable conditions. I've been a courier for Patterson Logistics for 4 years. I came to this building this morning for a banking appointment regarding my daughter's education account. That's the whole truth. Paulson looked at him for a long moment. SEAL Team 6, he said. Yes, and you've been driving a delivery truck. Courier van. There's a difference, Paulson almost smiled. Almost, Mr. Walker. In the next 2 hours, this building is going to be the lead story on every major news outlet in the country. The FBI is already en route. Victoria Hales Company is a federal contractor, which means what happened in that building this morning is a federal matter, which means I am going to be replaced by people with considerably more alphabet in their job titles. Before that happens, I would like to understand for my own professional satisfaction exactly what I'm looking at here. Ethan thought about that. He thought about the 6 years he had spent building a life specifically designed to be invisible, specifically calibrated to not be the kind of thing that ended up described in official reports and news segments and federal investigations. He thought about Mia at school right now, sitting in class, knowing only that her dad was running late and Biscuit said hi, living in the clean, simple world he had constructed around her with deliberate care. He thought about Marcus Vell on the floor of Conference Room C, with his hands bound by his own belt. What are you looking at, Ethan said, is a man who didn't want any of this. Who walked into a building to sign a piece of paper and walked into the middle of something else. Who made decisions based on what was in front of him. He looked at Paulson. That's the story. It's not complicated. The FBI is going to find it very complicated. Probably. You're not worried about that? Ethan looked out the window again. Detective, my daughter gets out of school at noon. Today's a half day. I told her I'd pick her up. That's what I'm thinking about right now. Paulson looked at him for another long moment. Then he reached over and clicked off the recorder. Off the record, he said. Just between us. What was it like in there? Ethan turned back from the window. He thought about the service corridor and the darkness and the granola bar wrapper pressed against the wall. He thought about Gerald's cough and the circuit of timing he had built in his head. He thought about Victoria Hale picking up a conference room chair and throwing it at a man with a rifle without hesitating for a single second. Mostly, Ethan said, it was a problem-solving exercise. Paulson nodded slowly. That's the most military answer I've ever heard to that question. The FBI arrived at 11:17. There were 3 of them initially: a lead agent named Carver, a woman named Diaz who handled federal contractor security protocols, and a younger agent whose name Ethan never caught because he spent most of the time listening and taking notes. Carver was the kind of federal agent who had decided somewhere in his career that projecting authority was more useful than building rapport, and he walked into the situation with the specific energy of a man taking over a scene. He took one look at Ethan in the police SUV and had Ethan move to a different vehicle entirely. The debrief took 90 minutes. Ethan answered every question with the precision of someone who had given operational briefings before complete, factual ordered. He did not editorialize. He did not offer analysis he wasn't asked for. He answered what was asked and stopped when the answer was finished. Carver kept pushing at the edges of it. You had no knowledge of the planned attack prior to entering the building. That's correct. No contact with any of the perpetrators before today. No, you've had no active affiliation with any federal agency since your separation 6 years ago. That's correct. But you have maintained your training. Ethan paused. I run, I work out, I sleep adequately. I eat reasonably well. Carver looked at him the way people look at something they can't quite categorize. Mr. Walker, 4 professional operatives, 1 fire alarm. A granola bar wrapper, he stopped. The granola bar wrapper. I needed a sound source. You used a granola bar wrapper to draw a trained operative into a confined space. It was what I had. Carver looked at Diaz. Diaz was writing something down. The younger agent had stopped writing and was just looking at Ethan with an expression that was hard to read but leaned towards something resembling awe. Mr. Walker, Carver said, I'm going to ask you something directly. All right. Is there anything about your background, your current activities, or your knowledge of the Sentinel architecture that I should know about and don't? Ethan looked at him. The Sentinel architecture is something I heard Ms. Hale reference in the conference room during the incident. I have no prior knowledge of it. My background is on file with JSOC and available to you through the appropriate channels. My current activities are delivering packages and raising my daughter. He held Carver's eyes. That's everything. A silence. We're going to need you available for further questioning over the next several days, Carver said. I understand. And Mr. Walker, what you did in there? Setting aside every procedural concern about a civilian engaging armed hostage takers in an active situation, Carver paused. It was exceptional work, Ethan said. Can I go get my daughter now? They let him go at 11:44. He drove to the school in a patrol car because his Honda was still in the Harmon Financial parking structure, which was a crime scene. And when he walked up to the school entrance at 11:58, the secretary met him at the door with an expression that said she had heard the news alerts and was putting together pieces she couldn't quite believe were adding up the way they were. He didn't give her time to ask. He just said, "Is she inside?" And the secretary said yes, and he went in. Mia was in the hallway outside her classroom with her backpack on, and when she saw him, she walked toward him at the specific pace of a 9-year-old who wanted very badly to run, but had decided that running was babyish, and she was almost 10. She made it 4 steps before she ran. He caught her and held on. She smelled like school pencil shavings and that particular institutional soap they used in the bathroom, and she was warm and solid and real, and he pressed his face against the top of her head and breathed. "You're late," she said into his shoulder. "I know." "I'm sorry. What took so long?" He pulled back and looked at her. Her face was wide open, the way children's faces are before they learn to protect themselves from each other. No armor, no performance, just Mia looking up at him with a question and the complete, unreflective confidence that whatever the answer was, it would be good enough. Banking stuff, he said. You know how that goes. She wrinkled her nose. Boring, incredibly boring, he agreed. He took her hand and they walked out of the school into the cold October air. And she was talking about something that had happened in class, involving a disagreement about the rules of a game that sounded complicated and passionately felt, and he listened to every word of it. He listened to all of it. He was still listening when his phone rang at 2:17 that afternoon. He didn't recognize the number, but the area code was local and he answered it. Victoria Hale said, "Mr. Walker, I got your number from the police report." "I hope that's all right." He was in the kitchen. Mia was at the table doing homework, her tongue pressed slightly to her upper lip the way it did when she was concentrating. Biscuit was asleep under the table on Mia's feet. "It's fine," he said. He walked to the other room. "I wanted to call before the FBI talks to you again," Victoria said. "They're going to have more questions tomorrow. And I want you to understand what was going to involve." "All right, Marcus Vell," she said. "His real name is Marcus Vell, which I imagine you know by now. He's a former military intelligence contractor. He worked for a private security firm called Arcturus Group until 2 years ago, when he separated under circumstances that aren't public. The FBI has been aware of Arcturus Group for 14 months. She paused. They believe Arcturus has a mole inside the federal contractor network. Someone who gave Vell my schedule, the building layout, and the access codes for the building's electronic security." Ethan was quiet. "Inside the contractor network," he said. "Yes, which means someone who had authorized access to information about Sentinel." "Yes. How many people have that access?" 47, she said. "Not all of them are Sentinel employees. Several are federal liaisons." Dodd Nesse, one from the deputy director's office at Homeland, she stopped. "Someone in that group sold my schedule to a man with a rifle. The FBI is now working to identify who, and because of what happened this morning, they are also very interested in you." Ethan leaned against the wall. "Not as a suspect," Victoria said quickly. "As an asset. Carver called me an hour ago. He wants to discuss whether your particular skill set might be useful in the investigation." A long silence. "I'm a courier," Ethan said. "I know what you told them you are. I also watched you dismantle a professional hostage operation, using what was in your jacket pockets." Her voice was direct, not unkind. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm telling you what's coming so you have time to think before they ask." He looked through the doorway at Mia, bent over her homework, one foot swinging rhythmically under the chair. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because you walked into a situation that had nothing to do with you and you chose to help anyway. Because you asked if I was hurt before you asked anything else. And because when it was over, the first thing you did was call your daughter's school." She paused. "You deserve to know what's coming, that's all," he said, the mole. "The 47 people, do you have a suspect? A beat?" "I have a concern," she said carefully. "Not a suspect." "A concern me." Another pause, longer. "There's a man named Garrett Foss," she said. "Federal liaison from the deputy director's office. He's been embedded with Sentinel for the last 8 months as part of a joint oversight protocol. He had full access to my schedule, to the building security architecture, and to the access codes that Vell's team used to lock down the electronic systems." She stopped. "He also called in sick this morning. First time in 8 months, he's missed a day." The air in the room changed. Ethan said, "Does the FBI know about Foss?" "I gave them the name 40 minutes ago. They're running it." She paused. "But Garrett Foss is connected to people in Washington who are going to make that investigation very complicated, very fast. People who have a stake in this going away quietly." Ethan understood then what she was actually calling about. She wasn't just warning him. She was asking him something. She was asking it in the careful, indirect way of someone who understands that some requests can't be made directly without implicating both the person asking and the person answering, and who has therefore constructed the call as information sharing while leaving the actual question alive in the space between the sentences. "Miss Hale," he said. "Victoria. Victoria." He looked at the ceiling. What exactly are you hoping I'll do with what you just told me? A pause. Then, quietly, I'm hoping you'll get some rest tonight, Mr. Walker. I'm hoping you'll have dinner with your daughter and let her tell you about her day. And I'm hoping that tomorrow, when the FBI comes back with more questions, you'll make whatever decision feels right to you. He almost said, that's not an answer. Instead, he said, how confident are you in Foss? Confident enough that I didn't sleep last night even before this morning happened. Her voice was steadier than the words warranted. He's careful, he's positioned himself well, and he has enough institutional protection that a direct accusation without ironclad evidence is going to look like interference, not investigation. The FBI knows this, that's why they're moving slowly. Slow investigations are how people disappear, Ethan said. Yes, she said, they are. A silence stretched between them. Mia called from the kitchen. Dad, what's an archipelago? He called back, a group of islands. Look it up, and tell me the 3 biggest ones in the world. A sound of protest, and then the shuffling of a book. Victoria said quietly, she sounds like a good kid. She's the best person I know, Ethan said. It came out without filtering, without the slight hedging that usually accompanied personal statements made to near strangers. It came out true. Then you should probably be in that room with her, Victoria said. We can talk more tomorrow, Victoria. Yes, the 47 people. The access list. Can you get me a copy of the access log from the last 90 days? Specifically the entries that touched my schedule and the building security architecture. A pause. That's a federal document, she said. I know. Technically, I'm not supposed to. I know that too. A longer pause. I'll see what I can do, she said. He hung up and stood in the other room for a moment with his hand still on his phone, thinking about Garrett Foss and the deputy director's office, and the specific kind of trouble that had roots in Washington and tentacles in places that a federal investigation would have to navigate very carefully to avoid. Pulling on the wrong thing and causing a collapse. He thought about what Vel had said in that conference room. The certainty of a man who believed his clients would protect him, because his clients needed him. He thought about how wrong Vel had been. He went back to the kitchen. Mia had found the answer. Java, Sumatra, and Borneo, she announced. All in Indonesia. Dad, why does Indonesia have so many islands? He sat down across from her and thought about tectonic plates, and the way the Pacific Ring of Fire had shaped that part of the world over millions of years. And he explained it to her in the way he explained things, starting from the simplest true piece and building outward, and she listened with the particular intensity she brought to things that genuinely interested her, which was most things. Biscuit snored under the table. The October afternoon light came through the kitchen window, at the angle it always came through at this time of year, and Ethan Walker sat at his kitchen table, helping his daughter with homework. And nobody in that moment could have looked at him and identified anything except a father. Which was exactly as it should be. His phone rang again at 4:41. It was a number he didn't recognize, different area code this time. He almost didn't answer. He answered. The voice on the other end was male, middle-aged, carefully modulated in the way of someone who had practiced staying calm. Mr. Walker, my name isn't important right now. What's important is that you and I have something to discuss before you speak with the FBI tomorrow morning. Ethan said nothing. The voice continued. You had a very unusual morning. You did impressive things, and now certain people are paying attention to you, who would have been better off not knowing your name. I'm calling because I think we can solve that problem for each other. Ethan said, who gave you this number? That's not the relevant question. It's the only question I'm interested in right now. A pause. Mr. Walker, let me be direct. The investigation that's beginning will have consequences for a number of people who have spent considerable effort ensuring their names stay out of investigations. You are now a thread in that fabric. We would like to discuss how to handle that in a way that's beneficial for everyone. Ethan looked at Mia, who was drawing something in the margin of her homework, a small dog that looked nothing like Biscuit, but was clearly intended to be Biscuit, with an oversized head and a concerned expression. I'm going to save you some time, Ethan said. Whatever you're about to offer me, I'm not interested. Whatever you're thinking about threatening me with, go ahead and try. And if you call this number again, I'll make sure the FBI has a recording of this conversation, which I've been running since you said. My name isn't important." He paused. "Have a good evening." He hung up. He sat very still for a moment. Then he took out a notepad, an actual paper notepad, the kind he used for grocery lists, and wrote down the number, the time, the exact words he remembered from the call in order, and the specific quality of the voice on the other end. Controlled, practiced. The voice of someone who made calls like that regularly enough to have developed a script. He circled the area code. It was a Washington, D.C. number. He put the notepad in his jacket pocket and looked at his daughter's drawing of a dog with a concerned expression. "Is that Biscuit?" he asked. Mia looked at it critically. "It's supposed to be. I can't get the ears right." "The ears look fine. They look like flaps. Biscuit has flap ears." She considered this. That's true. She added a small bowl in front of the dog, presumably to indicate that the dog was thinking about food, which was accurate to Biscuit's character if not his actual appearance. "Dad, yeah, was today actually boring?" He looked at her. She was looking back at him with the specific expression she got when she was asking a real question, and a small question, a quality she had developed sometime in the last year. This ability to put the actual thing she wanted to know inside a question that was easier to ask. He had noticed it and had felt simultaneously proud of her perceptiveness and slightly unnerved by how well it worked on him. Parts of it were boring, he said, waiting rooms. Paperwork, but not all of it. A pause. "No," he said. "Not all of it." She looked at him for another moment. She seemed to be deciding something. "Okay," she said, and went back to the drawing. He didn't know what she had decided. He suspected he would find out eventually, probably at a moment he wasn't prepared for, in the sideways way she had of returning to things she hadn't finished with. He made dinner. He made the thing she liked, pasta with the red sauce he made from scratch, because jarred sauce had been a point of pride with him since she was 5, and declared the jarred kind wrong tasting, and he had taken that seriously as feedback. He made garlic bread, because it was Tuesday, and Tuesday had become garlic bread day, through no deliberate decision, but through the accumulation of enough Tuesdays, that it was now simply true. They ate, she talked, he listened. After dinner, after dishes, after Biscuit was fed and walked around the block in the cold October dark, Ethan in his jacket, Mia in her coat with the hood up. Biscuit moving with the serene indifference of a dog who finds all weather equally acceptable as long as someone is there. They came back inside, and she did her reading, and he sat on the couch nearby, not quite reading his own book. Not quite thinking, existing in the particular suspended state that follows a day when everything that could have gone wrong went right, but only barely. He thought about the phone call at 4:41. He thought about Garrett Foss. He thought about an access log covering 90 days that Victoria Hale was going to try to get to him. He thought about the 47 people and the one of them who had sold a woman's schedule to a man with a rifle. He thought about Marcus Vell on the floor of a conference room saying, "You said you were nobody." He thought about Santos, who had told him once, in a different context, in a different life, that the thing about being trained to protect people is that it doesn't come with an off switch. You can stop doing the job. You can change the job. You can drive a courier van and make red sauce and walk a fat golden retriever around the block on Tuesday nights. But the training is a way of being in the world, and the world has a tendency to find the people who are in it that way. He thought, maybe Santos was right. He thought, I need to know who made that phone call. Mia appeared in the doorway in her pajamas. "I brushed my teeth," she announced. Which was the specific announcement that meant she was ready for the part of the night where he came and sat on the edge of her bed. And they talked for 10 minutes about whatever she wanted to talk about. Before she fell asleep. It had been their routine since she was 4 years old. He set down his unread book and followed her down the hall. She got under her covers and looked at the ceiling for a moment with the expression of someone gathering their thoughts, and then she said, "Dad." In a movie, when someone does something really brave, they always tell everyone about it. But real people don't always do that, right? Sometimes real people do brave things and just come home. He looked at her. She was looking at the ceiling. "That's right," he said. "I think that's better," she said, "the coming home part." "So do I." She pulled her blanket up. "The ceiling has that mark still." From when I threw the bouncy ball. I know. Are you going to fix it? Probably not anytime soon. Good, I like it. It's like a map of the time I made a mistake. She closed her eyes. Good night, Dad. He sat on the edge of her bed until she was asleep, which took 4 minutes, because she had always been a child who fell asleep quickly and completely, as though the day simply finished and she stepped out of it. He turned off her light. He went back to the living room. He picked up the notepad with the 441 phone number on it and looked at it for a long time. Then he took out his phone and sent a text message to a number he had not used in 4 years. The number belonged to a man named Reyes, who had done 3 deployments with Ethan, and had left the teams 2 years after Ethan did, and gone into a line of work that was adjacent to federal investigation without technically being federal. The text said, "Need to talk tomorrow morning. It's not a social call." He set down his phone. He thought about Garrett Foss in Washington, and the person who had called at 441, and the access log that might already be in the wrong hands, and the investigation that was going to be made very complicated by people with institutional friction and strong incentives to stay invisible. He thought about what Santos said. No off switch. He looked at the ceiling. From down the hall came the sound of Biscuit repositioning himself at the foot of Mia's bed, the familiar thump and settle of a large dog, finding the exact right configuration for sleep. The house was quiet. Ethan Walker sat with what he knew and what he didn't know and what was coming, and he made no decisions yet. Because decisions made at night in the first hours after a significant day had a way of being more emotion than logic, and emotion was not useful. But in the morning there were things he needed to find out. Reyes called back at 6:14 in the morning. Ethan was already up. Coffee made, Mia's lunch packed, Biscuit fed. He had been sitting at the kitchen table since 5:30 with the notepad in front of him and the access log that Victoria had sent at 11:47 the previous night, a PDF encrypted, with a message that said only, "Handle carefully open," on his laptop. He had been reading it for an hour. When Reyes called, Ethan picked up before the second ring. "You look different on the news," Reyes said. "The jacket doesn't do you any favors." "Did you see the full report?" "I saw enough." Granola bar wrapper. "Very creative. Santos would have loved it." A pause. "Santos would have also told you that you're now the most visible invisible man in the country, and that's going to be a problem." "I know, so what do you need?" Ethan looked at the access log on his screen. "I need you to run a name, Garrett Foss, Federal Liaison, Deputy Director's Office, Homeland. Embedded with Sentinel Technologies for the last 8 months. A silence on the line. "Ethan, I know. That's not a courier driver kind of name to be running." "No, it's not." Another silence. Reyes had the quality rare in people who did the kind of work he did, of knowing when to stop asking questions and start providing answers. It was one of the reasons Ethan had texted him, and not someone else. "Give me 2 hours," Reyes said.
"Don't talk to the FBI before you talk to me."
"They're coming at 9, then talk to me at 8. "Don't be late," he paused. "And Ethan, whoever called you at 4:41 yesterday, they're not done." That call was a test. They were measuring your response time and your tone. "They're going to call again, or someone else will, and it'll be more direct." "How do you know about the 441 call?" "Because I pulled your phone records 12 minutes after you texted me last night." "Don't be offended, it's faster than asking." A brief pause. "The DC number traces to a shell, 3 layers deep. Someone with resources and patience set that line up well in advance. This isn't a panicked reaction to yesterday morning. This is someone who has been maintaining contingencies." Ethan sat with that. "Foss," he said. "Maybe Foss. Maybe someone above Foss. Run the log and I'll run the name and we'll compare notes at 8. Reyes hung up. Ethan looked at the access log, 90 days of entries. 47 authorized users, each entry time-stamped, each tagged with the specific document or system accessed. He had been cross-referencing the entries against the timeline of the attack when Vel's team would have needed certain information, working backward from yesterday morning. The schedule access. That was the first thing Vel's team would have needed. Victoria's movements for the 14th of October. Someone had pulled her calendar from the Sentinel internal system on the 7th, 7 days before the attack, which fit the operational planning window for a team that needed time to run surveillance, confirm the location, and position personnel. The building security architecture, the electronic access codes that Ghost had used to lock down the Harmon Financial Building. That information had been accessed on the 9th, 2 days after the schedule pull. Both accesses from the same user credential, Garrett Foss. Ethan sat back. It was clean, almost too clean. A man with Foss's experience would know better than to use his own credentials for something like this, unless he was either very arrogant or very certain that no one would look. Or, unless he had been promised that the investigation would never get to the point where the log was examined. Which meant the 441 call wasn't just a warning. It was an attempt to find out how much Ethan knew before deciding what to do about him. He closed the laptop. He looked at Mia's lunch on the counter, the sandwich, the apple slices, the small bag of crackers she liked, and he thought about the geometry of what he was sitting in the middle of, and he thought about it carefully, without drama. The way Santos had taught him to think about situations that had more moving parts than were initially visible. Vel was in custody, that was done, the immediate threat was resolved. But the infrastructure behind Vel, the people who had hired him, who had given him the information he needed, who had set up a shell phone line as a contingency before the operation even ran, that was not done. That was active, and it knew his name. He drove Mia to school at 7:45. She talked about a book she was reading. Something about a girl who discovers her grandmother was a spy during the Cold War and has to figure out whether a particular neighbor is still connected to the old network. Mia had opinions about the plot. The grandmother should have just told her, Mia said. Keeping secrets from people you love is always worse than telling them. Even if the secret is scary, Ethan kept his eyes on the road. Sometimes, he said,
people keep secrets because they're trying to protect someone.
That's what the grandmother says. But the granddaughter says that's not the grandmother's choice to make. That the granddaughter has the right to know her own life. Mia considered this. I think the granddaughter is right, even though I understand the grandmother. He pulled up to the school. She got out. She turned back. Dad, yeah. She looked at him with the clear, undefended eyes she had gotten from her mother, that specific quality of seeing something directly and not looking away from it. You're going to be okay today? She asked. It was the question of someone who already knew the answer was complicated, and was asking anyway, because the asking mattered more than the answer. Yeah, he said, I'm going to be okay today. She held his eyes for one more second. Then she nodded, like a decision confirmed, and turned and walked through the door. He sat in the car for 30 seconds, then he drove to meet Reyes. Reyes was at a diner 12 blocks from Ethan's apartment, a place called Cora's, that had been there since at least 1987, based on the decor and the specific smell of coffee that had been brewed in the same machine for decades. Reyes was in a corner booth with 2 mugs already on the table, and a laptop open, and the expression of a man who had been awake longer than Ethan, and had found things. He wasn't entirely happy about finding. He was 51, compact, with the kind of stillness that came from a long time doing work that required patience. He had been Army before he crossed over to something more ambiguous, and he and Ethan had met through Santos during a joint operation that neither of them talked about, specifically. Ethan sat down. Reyes turned the laptop. Garrett Foss, he said. 44 years old, Georgetown undergrad, Georgetown Law, joined Homeland 12 years ago. Moved through positions at a rate that suggests someone was helping him move. Deputy Director's Office for the last 3 years. Clean record officially, no flags. He paused. Unofficially, and this took me 90 minutes, and a favor I'm going to need to collect. Eventually, Foss has a financial relationship with a private equity firm called Vantage Meridian Partners. Registered in Delaware, offices in D.C. and Singapore. Vantage Meridian has investments across 14 defense and technology sectors. One of those sectors is security architecture. He looked at Ethan. Sentinel Technologies competes directly with 2 of Vantage Meridian's portfolio companies. If Sentinel's Sentinel architecture were compromised, publicly discredited, shown to have a security failure, the contracts Sentinel holds with federal agencies would be subject to immediate review. Ethan felt the shape of it settle into place. This wasn't about selling the access code, he said. No, it was about creating the breach, the story. The failure. Vel wasn't supposed to succeed, Reyes said. He was supposed to make a very public attempt that would raise enough questions about Sentinel's security, the fact that someone could even get close enough to threaten the architecture, that the federal contracts would go into review. And in review, they'd be redirected toward Vantage Meridian's portfolio companies. Ethan looked at the coffee in front of him. Vel was a sacrificial play, he said. Vel thought he was the operation. He wasn't. He was the event. The real operation was the aftermath, which my being there disrupted. Reyes nodded. You ended the event too fast and too cleanly. There was no prolonged hostage situation, no public failure narrative, no footage of federal buildings going into lockdown because Sentinel's architecture was compromised. What there was instead was a former Navy SEAL who handled it in 30 minutes and walked out to call his daughter's school. He paused. The people behind this didn't get their story. And now they have a problem, which is that the investigation is going to lead to FOSS, and FOSS leads to Vantage Meridian, and Vantage Meridian leads to people who have spent considerable resources building deniability. The 441 call, Ethan said, was from a man named Philip Carnes, Vantage Meridian's general counsel. Reyes said it simply, without emphasis, the way you state a fact that speaks for itself. He was measuring you, deciding whether you were a loose end or an asset. Ethan processed this. He's going to call again, he said. It wasn't a question. Probably today. And this time he'll have a number you haven't seen before. And the offer will be more specific. Money, likely, or a threat dressed as an opportunity. Reyes closed the laptop. Here's what I need you to understand, Ethan. The FBI is moving on FOSS. Carver is not an idiot. But moving on FOSS is going to get complicated by Carnes and the people around Carnes before it gets simple, and complicated federal investigations have a way of losing evidence in the joints. He looked at him directly. You have the access log. Victoria sent it to me. I know. I also know that as of 40 minutes ago, the copy of that log held in Sentinel's secure server shows different timestamps on the FOSS entries. Someone modified the server-side copy. He let that land. The PDF Victoria sent you last night is now the only unmodified copy of that log in existence. The diner around them was filling up with the morning crowd. A man at the counter was complaining to Cora, who was apparently also the waitress, about his eggs. Two women at a nearby table were talking about a school board meeting. The world moving through its ordinary motions, indifferent to the geometry of what was sitting in a corner booth. Ethan said, they moved fast. They've been moving since yesterday morning. They just didn't know about the PDF until Reyes paused. Until you told them, the 441 call. Carnes wasn't just measuring you. He was fishing, and something in how you responded told them you had something. Ethan thought back to the call, the recording he had mentioned. The bluff he had run, they had believed it, or believed it enough to go looking. They think I recorded the call, he said. They think you have evidence beyond what you've told the FBI, Reyes said. Which you do the PDF, and now the PDF is the only copy. Yes, they sat with that for a moment. I need to get it to Carver, Ethan said. Before my 9 o'clock. If you hand it to Carver directly, Carnes finds out within the hour. Carver's office has been penetrated not deeply, but enough. One assistant, Carver's administrative coordinator, has a connection to Vantage Meridian through a family member. It's not actionable yet, which is why Carver doesn't know, but it means anything you give Carver goes through a filter. Ethan looked at him. How much of this did you put together in 90 minutes? He asked. Some of it I already knew, Reyes said. Vantage Meridian has been on a watch list in my world for about 8 months. They move money in ways that attract attention from people who pay attention to money movements. Yesterday's event moved them from the watch list to the top of it. He paused. I want them as much as you do, for different reasons. What do you need from me? I need the PDF, and I need you to have a conversation with Victoria Hale before you go into the FBI meeting. He slid a business card across the table. It had a number on it and nothing else. Have her call this number at 8:45. Not from her office phone, not from her personal phone. From a clean line, Ethan looked at the card. You're running an operation. I'm running a conversation, Reyes said. Operations require authorization. Conversations just require people to talk. Ethan picked up the card. At 8:32, he was in his car outside the diner with his phone on the seat. He called Victoria. She answered on the second ring. He could hear the sound of movement, of someone already in motion in a way that said she had not stopped moving since the previous morning. Ethan, I need you to listen to me and ask questions after. He gave her 3 minutes of what Reyes had told him, the Vantage Meridian connection, the modified server log, Philip Carnes, the administrative coordinator in Carver's office. He gave it to her in the compact, ordered way he gave information when the information mattered. When he finished, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. The server log, she said. I pulled that PDF from a local backup at 11:30 last night. Before I sent it to you, I was going to send a copy to our internal legal team. A pause. I didn't. I thought it could wait until morning. I sent it to you instead. Which means the local backup is also I need to check. He heard her moving, the sound of a keyboard. Then, the local backup has been accessed. 11:59 last night. Her voice was steady, but he could hear what was underneath it, the specific anger of someone who understands they have been violated in a very precise and deliberate way. 13 minutes after I sent it to you. Someone was watching the server in real time. Foss, Ethan said. Or someone Foss was talking to. She stopped typing. Ethan, if the PDF you have is the only clean copy. It's already with someone who knows what to do with it, he said. I need you to make a call at 8:45. He gave her the number from Reyes's card. A pause. Who am I calling? Someone who has been watching Vantage Meridian for 8 months, and now has the documentation to do something about it. He paused. Trust me on this. A longer pause. You know, she said, 24 hours ago you were a man who fixed banking paperwork. I still have the banking paperwork. It's in my jacket. Unsigned. I'll make the call, she said. 8:45. He hung up and sat for a moment in his car watching the street. His phone rang at 8:39. Different number. Clean, no area code he recognized, he answered. Philip Carnes had a voice that had clearly been trained, not military trained, but the other kind, the law and politics kind, the kind that knows how to put warmth into words that are not warm. Mr. Walker, I hope yesterday wasn't too stressful. You showed remarkable composure under pressure. What do you want, Mr. Carnes? A brief pause, the pause of a man recalibrating because the directness wasn't what he prepared for. I want to offer you an opportunity, Carnes said. Your background is exceptional. Vantage Meridian Partners has a division focused on risk assessment and security consulting for private clients. The compensation is significant. We're talking about a role that would give you stability, resources, and the kind of institutional support that I imagine a single father could appreciate. Ethan said, and in exchange, you continue doing what you apparently do naturally, which is solving problems. And you understand that some investigations benefit from careful handling. That certain documents, certain pieces of information are better preserved than acted upon. You want me to bury the PDF, a very careful pause. I want you to consider your priorities, Carnes said. Your daughter, her future, the life you've built. We can make that significantly more secure. Or, and I say this not as a threat but as a reality, the kind of attention you're currently receiving from federal agencies and private interests alike can make a very quiet life, very complicated, very quickly. Ethan let the silence sit. He had been recording the call since he answered. This time, not a bluff. Reyes had set up the recording capability on his phone at the diner, a simple clean app that created an encrypted file, time-stamped, legally admissible in federal proceedings in Washington state. Mr. Carnes, he said, I'm going to be transparent with you. I don't want your job. I don't want your money. I want my daughter to get out of school at the right time, eat bread on Tuesdays, and tell me about her book. He paused. And I want the people who put a rifle against a woman's head yesterday morning to answer for it fully, not partially, not with the parts that can be managed, but fully. Which means the people who funded and directed that operation, and then spent the night erasing server logs. Carnes said nothing. The PDF is already outside my control, Ethan said. Whatever you thought I had that you could reach, you can't reach it anymore. And this call is being recorded. Have a good morning. He hung up. He sat in the car. His hands were completely steady. He noticed that, and let it mean what it meant, not pride, just information. The information that some part of him had not lost what it knew how to do, and was not, in this moment, conflicted about doing it. He drove to the FBI building. The 9 o'clock meeting was different from the previous day's debrief. Carver was there and Diaz, and the younger agent whose name was apparently Flores, and who had apparently reviewed Ethan's service record overnight and arrived with the expression of someone trying to remain professionally neutral about something that was impressing them. Carver opened with a statement that told Ethan he already knew more than yesterday. "We've identified Garrett Foss as a person of interest," Carver said. "We're in the process of obtaining a warrant. I want to be direct with you, Mr. Walker. We believe you may have information relevant to this investigation that goes beyond what you've shared." "I have a recording," Ethan said, "from this morning. 8:39, Philip Carnes, General Counsel for Vantage Meridian Partners, offering me a job and suggesting I suppress documentary evidence." The room was very quiet. Carver and Diaz looked at each other. "You recorded Philip Carnes," Carver said, "this morning." "Yes, soliciting suppression of evidence. In those exact terms, yes." Ethan set his phone on the table. "I'll need a receipt when you take that." Flores made a sound. It was small and quickly suppressed, but it was definitely a sound. Carver reached for the phone. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I'm going to ask you something I didn't ask yesterday. Are you currently working with or for any agency, organization, or private entity in connection with this investigation?" Ethan thought about Reyes and the corner booth at Cora's Diner, and the card with the unmarked number. "No," he said. It was true in the specific technical sense that Reyes operated in a space that didn't map cleanly to those categories. "Are you aware of any documentary evidence related to this investigation that the FBI has not yet received?" This was the question. He thought about the PDF. He thought about what Reyes had said. Carver's office has been penetrated. He thought about the administrative coordinator with the family connection to Vantage Meridian. He said, "I'm aware of an access log from Sentinel Technologies' internal server covering the 90 days prior to the incident. I believe the server-side copy has been altered. I also believe there may be a way to get an unaltered copy to you through a secure channel that doesn't pass through this building's administrative infrastructure." Carver looked at him for a long time. It was the look of a senior federal agent encountering a statement that is simultaneously unhelpful in the way it's phrased and enormously helpful in what it's implying, and trying to decide how to feel about that. "You're telling me," Carver said slowly, "that you think there's a leak in my office. I'm telling you that I would recommend routing whatever I give you through Diaz's direct chain rather than the standard administrative process. That's all." Diaz, who had been taking notes with the specific neutrality of someone who was not going to react to things until she was alone and could process them properly, looked up. She looked at Ethan. She looked at Carver. She said, "He's not wrong." Carver set down Ethan's phone. "Talk," he said. Ethan spent the next 40 minutes telling Carver and Diaz everything Reyes's findings, the Vantage Meridian financial connections, the modified server log, the Carnes call, and the specific administrative vulnerability Reyes had identified. He held back Reyes's name and Reyes's methods, because those were not his to give, but he gave everything else with the completeness and order of an operational briefing. And when he was done, the room was quiet in a way that meant people were absorbing rather than processing. Flores had stopped trying to suppress his reactions and was just writing very fast. Carver said, "The access log, the unaltered copy. How soon can you get it to Diaz?" "It's already moving," Ethan said. "You should have it within the hour." "Through what channel?" Ethan looked at him. Carver made a sound that wasn't quite a sigh. "Through what channel that you're comfortable describing. A channel that Diaz can verify independently, and that doesn't route through your administrative coordinator," Ethan said. Carver looked at Diaz. Diaz said, "I'll handle it personally." At 11:22, Ethan walked out of the FBI building into a day that had warmed slightly from the morning. He stood on the sidewalk and checked his phone. A text from Reyes log delivered. Diaz confirmed receipt. Clock is running on Foss. A text from Victoria, the call went well. Thank you. And then, at 11:29, a text from a number he didn't have saved that sent a single word, warrant. He stood in the November morning and felt something settle, not completion, not resolution, but the specific sensation of a thing that has been in motion, finding the track it was supposed to be on. His phone rang. "Unknown number again," he answered. It was not Carnes. It was a woman, older, with a voice that carried institutional weight in the way that certain voices do when they have operated at high levels for a long time. Mr. Walker, my name is Eleanor Voss. I'm the Deputy Director of Homeland Security. I understand you've had a productive morning. Ethan said nothing. I'm calling to tell you two things, she said. First, Garrett Foss was taken into custody 12 minutes ago at his residence. Second, Philip Carnes is currently speaking with his attorney, which, given the recording you provided, will be a very long conversation. A pause. I also want to tell you something personally, if you'll allow it. All right, he said. I have read your service record, Voss said. All of it, including the parts that required elevated clearance. And I want to tell you that what you did in that building yesterday and what you did this morning is consistent with everything in that record. You served this country at a level that most people will never know about. And you've continued serving it, apparently, even when you were just trying to sign a piece of paper. Her voice was direct and not sentimental. That deserves to be said. Ethan looked at the street. Thank you, he said. There will be a formal commendation process, she said. You're under no obligation to participate. But I wanted you to know it's there if you want it. I appreciate that, Mr. Walker. One more thing. A pause. How's your daughter? He blinked. She's good, he said. She's at school. Good, Voss said. Keep her there, and hung up. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then he called Gerald Marsh. Gerald answered on the third ring, with the sound of a television in the background and the immediate alertness of a man who had been waiting for the call. Ethan Walker, Gerald said, I saw the news this morning. They're saying a federal investigation is open. They're saying there's a warrant. There is, Ethan said, because of you. Because of a lot of people, Ethan said. Including a 60-year-old Army veteran with bad timing and genuine allergies. A sound from Gerald that was unmistakably a laugh. My wife made me promise to thank you, Gerald said. She cried when she saw me on the news walking out. I told her I wasn't in any danger. She said that was obviously not true. She sounds smart. She's the smartest person I've ever known. 51 years married, and she's still finding new ways to be right. A pause. You doing all right? Genuinely. Ethan thought about the question the way Gerald had asked it genuinely, as stated, not as a formality. Yeah, he said, I think so. Good, that's good. A pause. You know, when I saw you move toward that panel in the lobby, when I coughed, I thought, that man has done this before. Not like a soldier thinks it, like a father thinks it. Like someone who has everything to lose and knows it, and moves anyway. Ethan didn't have an answer for that. I'll buy you a cup of coffee sometime, he said. I'll hold you to that, Gerald said. Somewhere that doesn't have a hostage situation. I find I prefer that now as a requirement. He hung up smiling. He walked to his car. He had 3 hours before school pickup. He thought about Mia's question from the night before. The grandmother who kept secrets to protect someone. The granddaughter who said that wasn't her choice to make. He thought about what he was going to tell her, and when, and how much of it she was ready to hold. Not everything, not yet, but not nothing either. He owed her more than nothing. He got in the car and drove, and the city moved past the windows in its ordinary, indifferent, completely unaware way. And Ethan Walker drove through it, thinking about the things that needed to be done, and the things that were finished, and the specific, irreducible thing that was neither the conversation with his daughter, that had no clear ending and no perfect beginning, and that he was going to have to find his way through, without a plan, which was fine. He had worked with less. He picked Mia up at noon. She came through the school door at the same pace, as always the 4 steps of restraint followed by the run, and she hit him at hip height and held on for longer than usual, which told him that she had heard something, or sensed something, or simply had the particular animal awareness that children have when the adults around them are carrying weight they haven't put down yet. He held on just as long. Biscuit okay? She asked into his jacket. Biscuit's asleep on the couch, he said. Hasn't moved since 6 this morning. He worries, she said seriously. He just doesn't show it. They drove home. She was quieter than usual, which with Mia meant she was processing something she hadn't finished shaping into words yet. He didn't push. He had learned in 9 years of being her only parent that the fastest way to close a door with her was to knock too hard. He made lunch, grilled cheese, tomato soup from a can because she liked the specific kind that came from a red can, and he had stopped pretending that homemade was worth the argument. She sat at the table and ate and watched him, with the careful attention of someone who is deciding something. He sat down across from her. "You want to ask me something," he said. She put down her spoon. "Emily's mom said she saw you on the news this morning, at the FBI building." He nodded. "She said there was a hostage thing yesterday. At the building you went to." He nodded again. Mia looked at him with those clear, undefended eyes. "Were you there when it happened?" "Yes," he said. She absorbed this. "Were you scared?" He thought about that. Genuinely thought about it, because she deserved a genuine answer, and not the parental version of an answer, which is the one designed to produce a specific reaction rather than convey an actual truth. "For about 3 seconds," he said, "when I first understood what was happening. Then I got busy." "Busy doing what?" He looked at her. This was the moment, not the conversation he had planned. He had not planned a conversation, because planning it would have meant scripting it, and scripting it would have meant managing her, and she was not someone who should be managed. She was someone who should be trusted. "Mia," he said, "I need to tell you something about who I used to be. Before I was your dad, or before I was only your dad." She was very still, he told her. "Not everything." She was 9, and there were things that belonged to a different version of that conversation, one that would happen when she was older, and could carry more of the specific weight of what certain years had cost. But he told her the shape of it, the Navy, the teams, the kind of work that doesn't get described in public, the missions that happened in places he still couldn't name. He told her about Santos. He told her about the mission that ended everything, without the details that would have made it a nightmare instead of a truth. He told her that he came home and decided that the most important thing he could do with whatever he had left was be her father. Fully, without reservation. That he had packed lunches and attended meetings and fixed pipes on Saturday mornings. Because those things were not lesser than what he had done before. They were the point of what he had done before. He told her that yesterday he walked into a building and a situation found him, and he made decisions based on what was in front of him, the way he always had, and people were safe because of it. She listened to all of it, without interrupting once. When he finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Biscuit had appeared at some point during the telling patting in from the living room, with his serious expression, and settling under the table on Mia's feet, as though he had heard something that required his presence. Mia looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up. "The book I'm reading," she said. "The one about the grandmother spy." "Yeah, the granddaughter says she deserved to know. That keeping it secret was the grandmother making a choice for her." She paused. "But I think I understand now why the grandmother waited. Not because she thought the granddaughter couldn't handle it. Because she wanted to give her enough time to just be a kid first. Before the world got complicated." Her eyes were very bright. "Is that why you didn't tell me?" His throat was doing something inconvenient. "Yeah," he said. "That's why." She nodded slowly. The nodding of someone who has received an answer that fits something they already half knew. "Dad," she said. "Yeah, you're still my dad, that's the same." "That's the same," he agreed. "Okay." She picked up her spoon. "The soup's getting cold." He looked at her. He thought about how a person could spend years carrying something heavy and complicated, and then have a 9-year-old set it down for them in 11 words. And how that was either the most humbling or the most clarifying thing that could happen to a person, and how it was probably both. "Mia, yeah, you're the best person I know." She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "I know," she said. "You tell me that a lot." A pause. "I think you might also be the best person I know. Even though you kept a secret for 9 years, which is a long time." "It is a long time. We're even," she said. "I didn't tell you about breaking the window in the garage with the basketball in March." He stared at her. She met his eyes with complete composure. "That was you," he said. "The soup," she said. "It's cold." He laughed. It came from the same place as the laugh in the car, on the morning of the 14th, deep and warm and not performed, and it filled the kitchen, and Biscuit lifted his head and looked at both of them, with the expression of a dog who found human. Behavior largely baffling, but appreciated the energy. 3 days passed. The news moved fast and then faster. Garrett Foss was arraigned on charges that included conspiracy, wire fraud, unauthorized disclosure of classified information, and 3 additional counts that the federal prosecutor described in a press statement as serious and ongoing. Philip Carnes resigned from Vantage Meridian Partners 36 hours after the warrant was issued, which was fast enough to suggest he had been advised by someone very expensive that resignation was the preferable option to what came next. Vantage Meridian itself was under federal investigation. 14 portfolio companies, 4 separate criminal referrals. The kind of unraveling that happens when something built on concealment meets a thread pulled at the right angle. Marcus Vell cooperated. That surprised people, but it shouldn't have. Vell was a professional who had been used as a disposable piece in someone else's strategy, and once he understood that once it was laid out for him in the specific terms of how he had been positioned and what was supposed to happen after the operation, he cooperated with the comprehensiveness of a man settling a very particular kind of score. His testimony connected 3 additional individuals to the Vantage Meridian network. 2 of them had federal titles. One of them had a title that made the press statement that included his name go briefly viral before the implications arrived, and made the virality feel less funny. Ethan read about all of it on his phone in the mornings before Mia woke up, standing in the kitchen with his coffee, the way he had always read the news efficiently, without drama, filing what was relevant and releasing what wasn't. On the 4th day, Victoria Hale called. "I want to have lunch," she said. "Not a debrief, not a meeting, lunch. There's a place near the Pike Place Market that doesn't attract journalists on Wednesdays." He went. The restaurant was small and the kind of unremarkable that is actually a deliberate choice. The food was not unremarkable, but the exterior certainly was, and he appreciated the logic of that. Victoria was already there when he arrived, at a corner table with her back to the wall, which made him smile. "You picked a good seat," he said. "I noticed you always take the seat with sightlines," she said. "I thought I'd take it first and see what you did." "I sat down," he said, without even looking annoyed. "That's impressive." She handed him a menu. "I ordered coffee." "I hope that's all right." "It's more than all right," they ordered. The food arrived. They ate for a few minutes in the comfortable silence of people who had been through something together and didn't need to perform ease, because ease was just what was there. Then Victoria said, "I want to offer you something. And I want to be clear that it's an offer, not a request, and that no is a complete answer." "All right, Sentinel is rebuilding its security architecture. Not just the software, the operational security, the human infrastructure. The way we assess and manage risk at the point where it intersects with the people who have access to sensitive systems." She set down her fork. "What happened wasn't a technology failure. Our architecture held. Vell never got the code. What almost happened was a human failure of vulnerability in the people around the system, not the system itself." She looked at him. "I need someone who understands that distinction, who can look at an organization's human infrastructure the way you looked at that lobby." He looked at his coffee. "I drive a courier van," he said. "You dismantled a federal conspiracy using an access log PDF and a recording app," she said. "You can do both things. The van doesn't have to go anywhere." He was quiet for a moment. "Part-time," he said, "however you structure it. I'm not available during school hours unless something is genuinely critical. Define critical imminent harm to people, not budget meetings." A small smile. "Agreed, and I consult, I don't operate. I look at systems, I identify vulnerabilities, I tell you what I see. What you do with it is your decision." "That's exactly what I want," she said. He thought about it. He thought about Santos saying, "The training is a way of being in the world. The world has a tendency to find the people who are in it that way." He thought about Mia saying, "You're still my dad." That's the same. He thought about the granola bar wrapper, pressed against the wall of a utility closet, and what it had produced, and whether the capacity to do that was something that should be left in a service corridor, or whether it belonged somewhere that could use it. "Okay," he said. Victoria nodded once, not triumphant. "Just decided." "One more thing," she said. "The formal commendation from Deputy Director Voss's office." "I haven't responded to that yet, I know," she told me. A pause. "You should accept it. Not for yourself necessarily. For Mia." so that someday, when she's old enough to understand the full shape of what you did not just yesterday but for years, there's a record that says it was seen. That it was acknowledged. She held his eyes. Some things deserve to be on the record. He sat with that. He thought about invisible work, and the years of it, specifically of doing things that mattered enormously, and left no mark that anyone outside a very small circle could see. He thought about whether the mark mattered. He had always decided it didn't. He had always been fine with that. But sitting across from a woman who had held the line in a conference room for 22 minutes and thrown a chair at a man with a rifle who had done her own version of the invisible thing, in her own way, in a room no one was watching, he thought about whether fine was the whole truth or just the acceptable version of it. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's more than I expected," Victoria said. And she meant it genuinely, which was one of the things he had come to understand about her in 4 days. She meant things. It was not a performance. When she said something, it was because it was true. He thought, that's a rare quality. He thought, it explains the 22 minutes. They finished lunch. He paid. She tried to argue, and he simply did not engage with the argument, which she apparently recognized as the more efficient approach because she let it go. Outside, the Wednesday Pike Place market crowd moved around them in its particular organized chaos of tourists and vendors and locals who knew which path to take. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. Not the formal version, the real version. The one that came from somewhere specific and meant the exact thing it said. "You threw a chair at a man with a rifle," he said. Without hesitating. "I'd been sitting there for 22 minutes with nothing to throw," she said. "I wasn't going to miss the window." "No," he said. "You weren't." He drove home.
Mia was at school for another hour and a half.
He went home and sat at the kitchen table, with Biscuit's head on his knee, and the October afternoon coming through the windows. And he thought about the shape of his life, and whether the shape was changing, or whether it had always had. This shape, and he was only now looking at it clearly. He thought about a morning 2 weeks from now when he would drive Mia to school, and then go to an office with glass walls and talk to people about where their systems were vulnerable and what a person with specific knowledge and bad intentions might do about that. He thought about coming home from that office in the afternoon, in time for pickup, in time for dinner, in time for the 10 minutes on the edge of Mia's bed before she fell asleep in 4 minutes flat. He thought, that's a life. He thought, I can do both. He thought, Santos was right that there's no off switch. But maybe the switch was never the point. Maybe the point was always the direction. His phone buzzed. A text from Reyes. It said, Vantage Meridian Singapore office just got raided. Thought you'd want to know. Also, your coffee at Cora's is on me next time. You earned it. He put the phone down. Biscuit made the sound he made, when he wanted to be acknowledged, not a bark. A specific low vocalization that sounded vaguely like a complaint about the general conditions of his life. I know, Ethan said. Long week. Biscuit sighed and put his head back down. The commendation ceremony happened 3 weeks later. It was small, which was how Ethan had agreed to it, not a public event, not a press statement, just the formal acknowledgement in a federal office in Seattle, with Deputy Director Voss attending via video, Carver and Diaz in person. Gerald Marsh, who had been invited because Ethan had specifically requested it, and nobody had seen a reason to say no. And Mia, he had asked her if she wanted to come, and she had said yes in the immediate, unequivocal way. She said yes to things that mattered to her. She wore the blue dress she wore for school picture day. She sat in the second row between Gerald and Gerald's wife, a woman named Ruth, who had brought cookies because she had been told there would be refreshments and then discovered there weren't any, and had simply produced cookies from her bag, with the energy of someone who had anticipated this outcome. Ethan stood at the front of the room. Carver read the formal language of the commendation, the specific, bureaucratic phrasing that federal documents use to describe extraordinary things in ordinary language, which somehow made the extraordinary things more real rather than less. Because the gap between the language and the event was a kind of testament to what the event had actually been. Ethan accepted the framed document. He shook Carver's hand. He shook Diaz's hand, Flores, who had apparently requested to attend, which Carver had allowed with the expression of a man who was not going to explain his reasons, shook his hand with the energy of someone who had a lot he wanted to say and was exercising discipline in not saying it. Gerald shook his hand and said Navy, always with the dramatic everything. Army, Ethan said, always with the commentary. Ruth offered him a cookie. He took it. It was excellent. Then Mia was there, standing in front of him in her blue dress, looking up at the framed commendation in his hands. She read it. Her lips moved slightly on the longer words. He watched her read it, and he watched her face as she understood not the specific operational details which were not included, but the shape of what was being said. That her father had done something significant. That people with authority and responsibility had looked at what he did and said, "This matters. This person matters. This deserves to be on the record." She looked up at him. "Can I hold it?" she asked. He handed it to her. She held it carefully with both hands and looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked up again and said, in the clear, carrying voice she used when she was saying something she had thought about, "My dad does brave things. But the bravest thing he does is make sure I don't have to." The room was quiet. Ruth made a sound. Gerald cleared his throat and looked at a point on the wall with intense focus. Carver examined his own hands. Ethan looked at his daughter holding a piece of government paper that said he was someone, and he thought, "I have been someone this whole time. I just needed her to say it out loud." He put his hand on her shoulder. She leaned into it. The weeks that followed had the quality of a life finding a new rhythm, not replacing the old one, but incorporating something that had always been there into the visible structure of the day. Ethan began working with Sentinel 2 mornings a week, then 3. He walked into rooms the way he had always walked into rooms, cataloging, assessing, reading the human geometry of how people moved around sensitive information. But now he said what he saw out loud. And people listened, and things changed because of it. The first vulnerability he identified at Sentinel was not technical. It was a pattern in the way access credentials were shared informally among trusted team members, a habit born of convenience that created a gap between who officially had access and who practically had access. And that gap was exactly the kind of space persons like Garrett Foss could inhabit, without triggering any formal alert. He explained this to Victoria in a meeting with her security leadership team. He used no jargon. He described it the way he would have described a weak point in a defensive perimeter to someone who needed to understand it quickly and act on it reliably. The team lead, a woman named Riordan, who had been defensive at the start of the meeting, the specific defensiveness of a competent person being told their work, has a gap, listened to the full explanation and then said, "Show me exactly where." He showed her. She fixed it in 4 days. After the meeting, she stopped him in the hallway and said, "You didn't make me feel stupid." He looked at her. "A lot of people who come in and find problems make you feel stupid for not finding them first," she said. "You didn't do that. The gap wasn't stupidity," he said. "It was familiarity. You were too close to see it. That's a human thing, not a competence thing," she nodded. "We're going to find a lot more of those, aren't we?" "Probably," he said. "That's fine. That's the work." She nodded again and went back to her office, and he went back to his temporary workspace, which had a window and a decent chair and a view of the street below, where people moved through their days in the ordinary, unaware, completely irreplaceable way. He thought about Vel in a federal facility somewhere, cooperating, counting down something. He thought about Foss, who had been denied bail on the grounds that the specific nature of his access made him a flight risk, which was the polite way of saying that a man who had lived inside federal systems for 12 years had too many doors still available to him. He thought about Carnes and his trained, warm voice and the offer that was also a threat, and he thought about how wrong Carnes had been, not strategically, not tactically, but fundamentally. About what Ethan valued, about what couldn't be bought and what couldn't be threatened away. He thought, some people spend their whole careers not understanding the difference between leverage and character. They think those are the same kind of force. They're not. On a Tuesday in November, 6 weeks after the 14th of October, he was making pasta sauce when his phone rang. It was Gerald. "Ruth wants to know if you and Mia are doing anything for Thanksgiving," Gerald said without preamble. "We have a son in Portland who can't make it this year, and we've got enough food for a battalion, and Ruth has decided that abundance is better shared." Also, Biscuit is invited. Ruth loves dogs. Ethan stirred the sauce. We don't have plans, he said. Good, come at 2. Bring the dog and a dessert, your choice. A pause. Also, Ethan, Victoria Hale is coming, Ruth called her. I want you to know that so you're not surprised. Ruth called Victoria Hale. Ruth calls everybody. She called the deputy director's office last week to thank them for the commendation. Voss called back personally. They talked for 20 minutes, a pause. My wife is a force of nature, she is, Ethan agreed. 2 o'clock, Gerald said. Don't be late. Ruth will start without you, and she'll be polite about it, and you'll feel terrible. He came at 2 o'clock with Biscuit on a leash and a pie from the bakery, 2 blocks from his apartment that Mia had selected with the seriousness of someone making an important decision. It was apple. She had considered pecan for several minutes before concluding that apple was the right choice for the occasion, the reasoning for which she explained at length during the drive. Gerald's house was warm and full of the smell of something that had been cooking since morning, and Ruth was exactly as Ethan had imagined her, compact, efficient, entirely certain of her welcome and yours, with the specific warmth of someone who had decided decades ago that life was better with more people in it, and had acted accordingly ever since. Victoria arrived at 2:15. She came through the door with a bottle of wine and the slightly uncertain quality of someone who was in a social situation they hadn't fully prepared for, which was, Ethan thought, the most human he had seen her look. Ruth took the wine, kissed her on the cheek, which Victoria received, with the expression of someone processing an unexpected but not unwelcome development, and pulled her toward the kitchen. Mia appeared at Ethan's elbow. Is that her? She asked. Yes, she's tall. Yes, she looks like she's in charge of things. She usually is. Mia considered this with the evaluative seriousness of a 9-year-old, making an important character assessment. I'm going to go talk to her, she announced. She might be busy with Ruth. I'll wait, Mia said, with the patience of someone who had decided on a thing and was willing to be strategic about it. She waited approximately 4 minutes. Then she walked into the kitchen and introduced herself to Victoria Hale, with the specific directness of a child who had decided that formality was an inefficiency and had opted not to participate in it. Ethan watched from the doorway as Victoria looked down at Mia, and Mia looked up at Victoria. And something passed between them, in the space of about 10 seconds, that he couldn't entirely describe except to say that it had the quality of a mutual assessment that came out satisfactorily on both sides. Victoria said something he couldn't hear. Mia laughed. He went to find Gerald. Gerald was in the living room with 2 glasses of something amber and the expression of a man who was precisely where he wanted to be. He handed Ethan a glass. They sat in the easy silence of men who had been through something together and didn't need to perform the having been through it. After a while, Gerald said, You know what I think about sometimes? What, that morning, the lobby floor, the cold of it on my cheek. He looked at his glass. I was lying there thinking, I'm 60 years old and I am about to die on the floor of a bank lobby because I needed to roll over my IRA. And that is an undignified way to go. A pause. And then I heard you. Not the words, the way you were breathing. Slow, and even while everything else was going sideways. And I thought, that man knows what he's doing. I'm going to trust that man. Ethan looked at him. You were the bravest thing in that room, Gerald said. Not because of what you did, because of what you chose not to do. You could have run. The panel was right there. You had a route out. But you went toward it instead. Ethan looked at his glass. I had nowhere to be, he said, except back in that room. Gerald nodded. That's the thing about having people who need you, he said. It changes the math on what's possible. From the kitchen came the sound of Ruth directing something and Mia laughing again, and Victoria's voice less guarded than he had heard it before. The voice of someone who was being fed and included and talked to by a 9-year-old without agenda and was finding it unexpectedly restorative. Biscuit, who had been accepted into the house with enthusiasm by Ruth and was currently somewhere in the vicinity of the kitchen, for reasons that had everything to do with the smell of turkey, made a sound of profound satisfaction. Gerald said, Ruth is going to try to make this a regular thing. Fair warning, I know, Ethan said. You're all right with that? He thought about what regular meant. He thought about the 14th of October and everything it had spun into motion, the investigation, The commendation, the Wednesday lunches, the sentinel work, the conversation with Mia at the kitchen table. The way she had held the framed document with both hands and said, "The bravest thing he does is make sure I don't have to." He thought about a man who had spent 6 years trying to make his life smaller so he could keep it safe, and had discovered that the things worth keeping had never needed the smallness. That the life he had built and the life he had come from were not in opposition. That both of them pointed at the same thing. He thought about Mia sleeping 4 minutes after her head hit the pillow, certain in the way only people who feel completely safe are certain, and about the specific responsibility of being the reason for that certainty, and about how it was the heaviest thing he had ever carried, and the lightest. He thought about all of that. "Yeah," he said, "I'm all right with that." The November afternoon came through the windows, and the food was almost ready, and the house was full of people. And Ethan Walker sat with a glass in his hand, and his daughter's laugh coming from the next room, and the understanding, clear and final, and without qualification, that the man who had walked into a bank lobby on an ordinary Tuesday to sign a piece of paper and had walked out of something much larger was not a different man from the father who cut crusts off toast and walked a dog around the block on Tuesday nights. He was the same man. He had always been the same man. And the life he had, the whole of it, the weight and the warmth, the peanut butter sandwiches and the service corridors, the Tuesdays with garlic bread and the mornings in the dark reading access logs, the 9-year-old who fell asleep in 4 minutes, and the woman who threw a chair without hesitating, and the 60-year-old soldier who coughed at exactly the right moment, that life was not a compromise between who he was and who he wanted to be. It was the answer. It had always been the answer. He had just needed one ordinary Tuesday to see it clearly.